The implementation phase is the actual operation of the new system. So we've got that final UAT that's conducted in this environment. The system might also go through the certification and accreditation process at this phase as well. During this phase, there should be a full system test to ensure that the system is ready to be able to migrate it to the production environment. Now, the planning of your implementation should be done well in advance of the actual implementation date. In fact, we talked about doing a lot of this design, or a lot of the planning back in the design phase. Each step in setting up the production environment should have a list of those who are responsible and have a verification process as well. I remember watching this really great video that Microsoft put out when they were upgrading from Windows NT4 to Windows 2000 at their home office in Redmond. And they had this incredible implementation phase and those responsible and, you know, this entire migration process. And they got up to that one point, they kind of like all came to one point where they're about to create their first domain controller and Active Directory tree. And it was kind of fun watching. And because it really kind of, I think, gave a good background about how much work can actually be involved in a major project like, you know, a domain upgrade or an entire network operating system upgrade for a company the size of Microsoft. Your implementation planning will occur, of course, after the system's been developed and when it's ready for operation. Beyond the assigned tasks of those responsible to set up the infrastructure for deployment, you're going to need to consider training for the new support people or personnel. The goals of the training should basically give them appropriate support structures for first, second, and third line support teams. And what that means is that, you know, when we are doing training, we are going to have people that are going to be working at it at different levels or being able to provide support at different levels. And so we need to be able to help set up that kind of three-tier support team. The implementation plan should also consider the steps to migrating from the old system to the new system. And that might be done through a transition project. And that means you may have things running in parallel where people are still updating information in the old system. They might actually have some groups of people using the new system and having some, you know, issues of at some point migrating the old to the new. I know that I'm experiencing this in a similar situation with one of the airlines I frequently fly. I purchased another airline. And so now I've been flying on both, but they don't talk to each other yet. It's almost been a year. And it's kind of funny because it just seems to me like, you know, we're seeing two systems side by side trying to interact, and some of the fun, if you call some of the scheduling problems fun for the customers, as you watch this project. But of course, I'm thinking of it in this idea of I understand what they're going through and the size and scope of that kind of a project. So let's talk about those implementation transition phases. The first phase would be to develop what we call the 2B support structures. Now, one approach, of course, in this is to do a gap analysis, and depending on that analysis, it'll show you or provide for you the information about the appropriate support and training you're going to need for staff members. Notice it's called 2B support structures. That means that, you know, we want to have people in place who can answer questions, understand what's happening before we start bringing this in. The second phase is then to establish the support functions, and that means you might have to create new service level agreements. You might have to make sure you outline some of the attributes like operating time, support time. You're going to have to also, in the support function, outline things like the MTBF and the MTTR. Those, if you're not familiar with them, are the mean time between failures and the mean time to repair, as well as the response time that you're going to say that a part of this agreement as a support function, if something goes wrong, you know, this is what it will take us to get there to be able to come in, repair, to respond to the issues. Now, as we talk about those phase 2 support functions, the other things we need to have is a plan, an implementation plan, and a knowledge transfer plan. Another part of that, you might go with the training plans, right? End user training for all the skill levels need to be considered. You may have to migrate the data from the old system to the new system, and in the migration process, there may have to be some types of conversions. That means we may have to refine the migration scenario. And during that process, as we're migrating data over, if things go tragically wrong, we want to make sure you have a scenario about how you can fall or roll back to the old system. Now, when we talk about the changeover, or sometimes called the cutover, there's different techniques. One I already described with the airline example was kind of a parallel changeover. They're both working together. Now, I don't know what their plans are for merging it because I only know it from the customer's point of view, the end user. But at some point, while they're running parallel, one's going to become smaller before it finally is all into the other one. You could also do a phased changeover where maybe the airlines will put booking into one, but not the actual scheduling or whatever they're going to do. And maybe that's what they're doing. You could also do, my favorite, the abrupt changeover. I can't think of how many suspense movies where there's like if I push this button, it could solve our problems or blow us all up. And and somebody says like I don't know, and some other person just comes over and hits a button, right? That's the abrupt changeover. They're like we're saying, okay, tomorrow, new system, done. Part of that implementation phase was certification and accreditation. Now, certification is a process of performing a comprehensive assessment of operational technical controls to determine that they meet the goals and compliance. The accreditation is the official management decision to authorize the operation of an information system and to accept the risks involved. Now, if you want to think about, if you're still like, I'm not sure that I got those, let's just think about what we're studying for here, the CISA. We're studying for a certification. Now, you're not studying for Ken's CISA certification. Because if you are, I could probably build a test and put it into a testing system, and you can pay me money to take the test, and I'll say you're CISA certified. Now, that's the accreditation, right? The official management, or in this case, the ISACA, who is putting their weight of behind the certification process. Another example could be I could tell you that I got a doctorate's degree because I've been offered those on email for a couple $1,000 from some college I've never heard of. But it would be a doctorate certification, but we're back to that accreditation. So I'm trying to give you examples of how those two go together. Also, at the end of the implementation, we're going to do the post-implementation review. And that means we're going to assess the adequacy of the system. We want to review the return on investment and try to provide recommendations to address any inadequacies or deficiencies. And if we find those, then we want to have implement a plan to address those recommendations. And, that might just be version 2. There are lots of potential risks that can occur in this entire process. You have the business risk, which is relating to the likelihood that your new system might not meet your business needs. You have the project risk, where within the project activities, there may be times where we're exceeding limits of the resources set aside, or maybe the cost, the budget. There are types of risks that occur during the design and developing the software, such as times when we're working within the project, when we may have come against a problem, maybe it's a resource problem, maybe it wasn't designed well enough and the data doesn't match the goals. Maybe suppliers that we need for software or hardware. Some other risks that occur from within the organization could even be people deciding that they want some changes after the project's already begun. Maybe even risks with the technology that's chosen. You might decide to develop a system that's going to run on a Unix platform, and or some other platform, and maybe you've run into some issues. And by the way, nothing wrong with the Unix platform. I'm just picking one because I've talked about Microsoft so much. But the idea is that maybe we've chosen Ken's server technology, and I send you this really horrible hardware device that I call a server, and it breaks down. These are things that you have to look at as well as where the risks might occur. As an auditor, you should be aware that even though the SDLC management approach was followed, it doesn't mean that you're going to have a successful completion of the project. You need to review the management discipline over the project's lifetime. That means you have to ask questions. Does the project meet the goals and objectives? Was there project planning performed? Were there signs of scope creep, which is an indication that a software baseline might not have been created? Were there signs of change control put in there and planned for? Were there periodic reviews and risk analysis being conducted throughout the entire development lifecycle?